We're now going to cross over to our second session this afternoon, which is going to be a case study interview with one of the prominent leaders, not only in the city of Pretoria, but actually in our country. And 2 years ago, she spoke at our Courage Conference, which was an amazing event and a fantastic session. So again, you're really going to enjoy this afternoon's discussion. So as we're going to carry on, you're going to learn who it is, who this lady is exactly and what she has done. So I'm not going to give her any introduction other than asking you guys to help me welcome Teresa Conradie.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's so lovely to be with you again.
Thanks, Teresa. And before we get to, a new victory you just got aware of this morning, and I'm so excited with you. But before we get to that, let's maybe start by you telling us a little bit about yourself. And I really appreciate the time that you're taking out of your busy schedule as well today to be joining us and just coming and share with us. And I know directly after our session, you're off to a radio station to also be interviewed. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe those first few years when Teresa was just born. Where were you born? Where are you from? And maybe even tell us a little bit about your family.
Yes, Ron, so I'm a farm girl. I grew up in a farm outside of Highprofile in Mpumalanga. Really, my childhood was absolute bliss. My grandparents stayed with us on the farm. My great aunt and great uncle stayed with us, and we were really brought up in such a nurtured and cherished way. And if I think of a person of integrity, my dad immediately comes into my thoughts. He passed away in 2015, but that which he taught us has just never left me. So very happy childhood. Went to school at Waterval in the primary school. The high school was then closed in the early 70s because it was too small. And I matriculated from the high school Belfast. And then because I believed the best thing I could do for God is to fight against the communists, I actually went to the military. And after that, went to the University of Pretoria, where I studied law, met my husband there, and since 1988, that's a full 32 years, I've been an attorney. My family, my husband, Dion, he always says to the children they mustn't tell anybody where he works, but he doesn't have to be embarrassed anymore. At the end of April, he retired after 36 years working with Eskom. So we're in a very new phase of our lives. I'm married to a pensioner, and we check the schedules to see on which day Builders Warehouse has pensioners discount, etc., etc. We have two children, Blanche. Although our parents told us that one can't make a living out of sports or music or art, Blanche is making her living out of sports. She's manager of cricket at Tuks. And my son, Donnie, studied information technology, visual arts, and then he was in New York until September last year, studying musical theatre, and so he makes his living out of art and music. And by God's grace, came home and couldn't get a visa to go back to work in the performing arts in New York. Otherwise, he would have been there now. Yeah, so that's the Conradie family.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us, and I would love to maybe give you our shopping list as well. You know, as far as I know, it's on Tuesdays when that specific discount applies. Um, Back to your career. After you studied law and after qualifying then as a conveyancer of the High Court of South Africa, I'm sure as a woman you were almost alone, you know, in the 80s, in that, so to speak, man's world. It was the 80s, it was the Free State province, and it was still during apartheid. Do you mind telling us about those first few years and maybe some of those hard learned lessons?
Yeah, many people don't realize it, but women were only allowed to practice law in 1963. So before 1963, women could not practice law. They could work for somebody, but they couldn't be admitted as an attorney. So even when I qualified in 1985, the opportunities for women were still very, very few, and it was really a harsh and what would I call it, a foreign territory for women to be in. So you would, for instance, find buildings that didn't even have a ladies' bathroom. And the men were certainly not very receptive of us. So there are many anecdotes that I can speak of, but one of them is we were in the High Court here in Pretoria. It was a case that was about a patent, these very large locks clamps that take that the railway containers go onto the back of the trucks. The dispute was about this. And when the day was over, our firm was in sunny Arcadia. The senior attorney who was with me said to me, well, you want to do a man's job, get these big clamps back to the office. Now, I'd gone there with the bus because it was at Church Square. So, yeah, I sat with these two huge clamps, and I had no way to get them back to the office. But luckily, I had befriended Mrs. Robinson, who was in charge of the transport. I went to the payphone. It was before cell phones, phoned her, and she fetched it. And I took a vow that from now on, if they want me to act like a man, I will act like a man. So just a few weeks later, we were in consultation with our counsel, and there were about 6 of us in his chambers, and I was the only woman, and in came the tea. And I could see that everybody's expectation was that I would pour the tea. So I decided the tea can get cold. I am not going to pour the tea. In the end, the tea got cold, and I was very satisfied. But when I told this to an American friend of mine, she said to me, Teresa, you must be very careful. We did this in America, and now when you're in a plane, a man will not even help you take your luggage out of the overhead shelves. And then I decided I must act like a woman, because I'm sure I bring something that the men don't bring. So it was a very tough lesson for me. And I very often say to young female lawyers, it takes nothing of you to pour the tea. It takes nothing. Don't raise your eyebrows if the men get up when you come into the room. And today I can truly say the men of my generation treat me like a lady, and I treat them like gentlemen. But I mean, there are many, many other things that really made it hard for us. For instance, because I could simply not get articles when we moved to the Free State, I did articles for nearly 3 years. So they were just not the same opportunities. But I'm a great believer in the fact that God wastes nothing. that God uses the processes in our lives to shape us for what He wants to achieve. So there's no resentment.
Fascinating stories, and I think we can listen the whole afternoon to what you have to share. But if I can ask you, when did Jesus become a reality to you? You know, maybe there are some people listening to us now who's never heard the term lawyer and Christian in the same sentence. You know, maybe to them it might even be a little bit of an oxymoron. So if you don't mind me saying that, and please don't take any offense, but when then in your journey did Jesus become a reality to you?
Yeah, Ron, I think it's only second-hand car salesmen that get more jokes told about them than lawyers. So there's the story about this guy that arrives in South Africa, and he takes his friend to a cemetery. They're looking for somebody's grave, and yeah, this tombstone is, and the tombstone says, "Here lies a lawyer and an honest man." And his friend from the United States says, "My goodness, I didn't know you buried two people in one grave." So surely that is the impression that people have of lawyers. But yes, but I grew up in the Methodist church. Our church was so small that there was no Sunday school. So my dear God-fearing mother would take us on the farm into the into the garden, and I was fairly hyperactive, and she had to force me to sit still on a Sunday morning and try and teach me some Sunday school. She wasn't very successful, but either way, when I went to high school in 1975 on the 1st of March, I attended my very first CSV, Christian Studentenvereniging meeting, and it was like a revelation. It was like a Damascus Road experience when the person who was speaking quoted John 3 verse 16, God appeared to me, or God appeared in my spirit. And I can actually, it's 45 years ago, I can actually still remember the peace that came over me. I backslided 100 times after that, but I've been involved with Christian lawyers globally since 1993. And I've just got absolute no doubt that once God can take hold of a lawyer, they become quite useful. I mean, he took hold of Paul, who was a lawyer, and we wouldn't have had any of those wonderful letters that he wrote in the New Testament if it wasn't for him. And what made Paul's letters of such authority is that he understood the Roman law. He understood government, and because of that, he had an authority to speak on those topics.
No, I agree absolutely. And if the Lord could speak through a donkey or an ass, you know, He could speak through any of us.
Absolutely.
As well. Besides being a director in your own firm, Maphalla Mokate Conradie Incorporated, so running your own practice, you've served as an acting judge in the Transvaal Provincial Division of the High Court of South Africa. You've served on disciplinary committees of the Law Society. You've acted as a lecturer and a moderator for them. You've also represented South Africa internationally at the Convocation of Advocates on several occasions. You currently serve as the chairperson of the Christian Lawyers Association of South Africa and the president of the Advocates Africa. So it's clear, and I'm sharing your CV. I know you probably will mind, but I apologize for that. It's just so our participants can get a clear view of who this amazing lady is. It's clear that you're passionate about your vocation. maybe you can tell us about a few of those high-profile cases you've been involved with, quite often at no payment, in your own private capacity, but where you felt you had to make a difference. And perhaps you can even share a little bit about that great victory you just heard about this morning.
Ron, so my mentor was Sam Erickson, an American who established Advocates International in 1991. And I was actually so moved when Pastor Chris was speaking about the Good Samaritan story. The Good Samaritan has really been the guiding story for Advocates International. And Sam Erickson used to say, the Christian lawyers are not the Good Samaritan. The Christian lawyers are the innkeeper. They are the ones in their countries that have to receive the wounded and have to look after them and use their resources, etc. So when Sam Erickson used to explain the role of a Christian lawyer, he said, imagine that you have an island of which the cliffs are absolutely straight down. And on this island lives a very cruel landlord. And whoever he doesn't like, he just bumps off the island. So now you've got different parties that play different roles. The International Red Cross must go and pick the guy up that's fallen on the rocks at the bottom. The international media must broadcast far and wide what this cruel landlord is doing. But the role of the Christian lawyer is to put up guardrails around the edges of the island so that the landlord cannot push somebody off. So if we, for instance, work with missionaries in countries where it's very difficult for them to live because of a lack of religious liberty, it is our role to keep them safe. It is our role to make sure that religious liberty is secured in those countries. So it's just a helpful picture to understand one's role vis-a-vis some others. There are a number of fairly high-profile cases that we've been involved in. I'll just mention one. You can remember a few years ago, there was an organization, die Organisasie vir Godsdienstonderrig en Demokrasie. Oh God was the unfortunate abbreviation of that. And they were opposing religious observances in schools. In other words, they didn't want the assembly to go with prayer, etc., etc. So in that case, we actually acted as amicus curiae, and it was a difficult case, but I do believe that the contribution that we made there was relevant. Then you will remember the Gaum case with the NG Kerk. So their organization by the name of ADAXA, the Alliance Defending the Autonomy of the Church, was established, and we acted for them. And what we brought to the court was not to support either of the parties, but to try and secure the autonomy of churches to be able to decide on their own doctrine, etc., etc. Now, you were referring to our great event this morning. Some of the participants would know that about 3 years ago, just a small handful of God-fearing people, white, black, brown, together with the people of the First Nation, went to the High Court in the Western Cape and asked for our Electoral Act to be declared unconstitutional, in as far as it doesn't provide for an individual to stand as an independent candidate. So when we have our general elections, you cannot vote for Cyril Ramaphosa. You have to vote for the party which Cyril Ramaphosa represents. And it was really the result of people being disillusioned with politicians, people feeling that there's no accountability, There's no way in which, if I'm unhappy of what's happening in the eastern side of Pretoria, I can't go to my member of parliament and ask them to do something about it. So either way, the application was then turned down in the Western Cape, and then we appealed it. I was acting for the New Nation movement, the applicant, and we appealed it to the Constitutional Court. The matter was heard in August last year. And yesterday, we got the news that we're getting the judgment this morning. So when you go back to your homes, you would just see that it's filling up the news. The court granted in our client's favor. The Electoral Act, in as far as it doesn't provide, as I've mentioned, has been declared unconstitutional. And Parliament is now given 24 months to rectify that. In other words, in our next general election, over and above the parties that you will be able to vote for, you will be able to vote for individuals. So it's reshaping and redesigning our political landscape forever. And it's now the time for people of faith and the civil society to get involved in that process so that one can make absolutely sure that we get what we want and that the politicians don't manage to dominate that process. So yeah, it's I'm quite embarrassed. I was telling you just now, because the battle was so hard and it was fought without any money. When the judge left the courtroom this morning, we were in one another's arms, in front of the television cameras, ignoring social distancing. So I'm really a bit embarrassed about not being disciplined about that, but it was just overwhelming.
Wow. No, we celebrate with you and congratulations on that milestone, the victory, which you and your team managed to achieve there. Our topic today is integrity. What does integrity mean to you?
Ron, my example of integrity is the biblical Daniel. Now, if one reads the book of Daniel, you see that Daniel was just like all of the other young men who were trained with him. They say they were without blemish, they were handsome in appearance, they were skillful in all wisdom, endowed with
basically.
Yeah, so they were like but all of them were the same. So when Nebuchadnezzar has his dream and he can't even remember what he dreamt, then the only one, they've all been trained in witchcraft 1-on-1 and sorcery 1-to-1, etc., but the only one that has the ability to explain the dream to Nebuchadnezzar is Daniel. So what made the difference? And I always believe there were two things that made the difference. First of all, the Holy Spirit made the difference. But secondly, God knew he could trust Daniel because of his integrity. His integrity, he was unwavering in his integrity. He didn't eat the food that had been sacrificed to the gods. He wasn't scared. He simply did that. So I always ask myself, what prevents me from having integrity? What prevents us from having integrity? And there are a few things, and fear is one of them. You know, Daniel was, the official told him, you and your friends are going to be killed if you're skinny and you don't look good. But that didn't deter Daniel from saying, I'm not going to eat the king's food. He was not scared. He was not scared to go into the presence of the king, although the king said all of these sorcerers are going to be killed. So now we find ourselves so often scared. Why is it that when corruption and I'd love to be able to hear Graham speak. There came a point in Graham Power's life when he had to put his fear aside. He had to say, I have to speak the truth despite what happens. And I've often wondered, there are so many Christians, both in the private sector and in government, who are part of corruption, but they are very often unwillingly part of the corruption, but just their fear prevents them from speaking out. The other thing that prevents us lawyers is our ego and our ambition. There's this, my life's verse comes from Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require? He requires that you act justly, that you love mercy, and that you walk humbly with God. Now, the first two are easy for lawyers. The third one, walking humbly with God, that one we can't do. Because we love our own voices, we love our own images, we love it if people revere us. So now, Daniel didn't have an ego, because he was an Israelite that had been carried away. His parents had been carried away in exile. Some commentators said that he might even have been a eunuch. So for instance, I was just finding now during lockdown how difficult it has been for us lawyers to admit to each other that we are drowning financially, that we are in a place where we might have to lay off staff, where we might have to close firms. How difficult would it not be for somebody who has always had to go and say, I am not able to pay my rental this month. And we've had to do it. And ego is an enemy of integrity, but humility and integrity are best friends. If you, for instance, look at Thuli Madonsela, or if you look at Chief Justice Mogoeng, the integrity and the humility goes hand in hand. The other thing that very often intercepts our integrity is our culture. So you want to live up to what your cultural group expects of you. Whether you're Afrikaner, whether you're Zulu or Xhosa, you want to be accepted there. So this is why even people that are professional people and high up tolerate witchcraft, they tolerate idolatry. And it's really a lack of integrity, but because they have the cultural pressures, they don't have it. And then the last one that I'm going to mention is our cluttered lives. We're so busy and we've got so many things to do that the voice of reason, the voice of God's reason, we just don't hear it. I just still stand amazed. I'm on no social media, but I just stand amazed at how active the social media has been of the people around me during this lockdown period. And I have consistently said to myself, you can either listen to what is happening on social media, or you can go and sit at the feet of the Father and ask him what's happening. Because otherwise you are following the wrong instructions. You jump on the bandwagon with something that is on social media and you like. And a little bit later, you kind of think, wow, what did I do now? I shouldn't have liked that. I shouldn't identify myself with that alone. So Ruan, those are really the things that I struggle with. As I say, fear, ego, culture, and busyness. are the things that make it hard for me to absolutely live a blameless life.
Wow. Now, those are words of wisdom. I know we're pressed for time because of your upcoming radio interview as well. So in closing, last question, maybe, asking you if you have hope for South Africa and for the world amidst of all these craziness we're facing around us and uncertainties, maybe specifically to business leaders. Do you have hope for our future? And, is there any last advice or words of inspiration you could leave us with?
Yes, Ron, I'm either the ultimate optimist or I'm perfectly dumb. But I refuse to believe that the investment that God has made in this country, that He will allow it to go to waste. If we want to believe that God has got a stake in our country and that He's got our interest at heart, we have to see that He gave us somebody like Thuli Madonsela. We have to see that He gave us a Chief Justice who is a godly man. Whether one agrees with President Ramaphosa or whether one does not agree with President Ramaphosa, compared to so many other world leaders, he's actually doing a magnificent job. So if that is God's intention, and even this case this morning, God saying, I'm not done with South Africa. I want to do exceedingly and abundantly more for South Africa than we've ever done. But what it will require is of Christians, and we make up the majority of people in the life. My friend Landa Cope always speaks of the gospel of salvation, and she speaks of the gospel of the kingdom. All of us have been through the gospel of salvation. We've saved, but we don't know how to live. We don't know how to do kingdom business. And if we can, in our churches, in our faith groups, start teaching and start living with a kingdom agenda in mind, why will God let us down? And we are in a window of opportunity. God is resetting the world. God is resetting the political landscape. He's resetting the ecological landscape. He's resetting social landscapes. So if we cannot partner with God in this time and sit at His feet and say, Father, what are you doing and what do you want me to do in partnership with you? Then we're going to lose the opportunity. So yes, Ruan, I get up with a skip in my step every morning, and I can't wait to see what God wants to do.
Wow. Thank you so much for the words of inspiration, the practical stories and advice you shared with us this afternoon. You were such a great blessing, and would our participants join me in just giving Teresa an applause of appreciation, even though it's virtually. If we were in one room, we would have all given you hugs now, but due to social distancing, we're not allowed. Thank you so much, Teresa, for your time and for sharing with us. We pray that God will continue to use you as the salt and the light that you are in our nation and in your industry. Thank you so much.
Ruan, thank you for inviting me. It's just such a delight to be with you guys. Really, thank you.
Great. So, guys, it is time for a 5-minute comfort break.